all addiction really is about unhealthy coping mechanisms. When people don't have ways of coping with what's happening, negative emotions, painful emotions, then they reach out for some of these things to numb or to escape. We all have these ways where we escape, where we numb out, where we self-sabotage. And so part of not doing that self-sabotaging behavior towards ourselves anymore is learning how to embrace your experiences, whether they're pleasant or unpleasant.
Welcome to Entrepreneurs Recovery Podcast. I'm your host, Jesse Harless. This is a podcast where we explore the healing potential of psychedelics. We explore stories of resilience, entrepreneurship, holistic health, and much, much more. If this is your first time tuning into the show, welcome. I'm really grateful that you are here as the show continues to grow. And thank you for those who are liking, subscribing to the show on YouTube or leaving a review on iTunes or Spotify. And if you haven't done that yet, please take a moment to do so, because this helps trigger the algorithm and helps more people to reach the show. And, I'm putting more effort now into putting reels out on a weekly basis, multiple reels. I'm starting to reach out to more guests that you're requesting or people reaching out to me. And I'm just really grateful as the show continues to grow. This is episode number 83. And I'm really grateful for that milestone. And I have some surprises for you, some special guests coming on the show. And some that are scheduled for episode 199, but hey, we're only on 83 now. So I got some special guests on the way. So thank you for continually listening and tuning into the show. I also want to mention my work with Psychedelic Concierge. If you're interested in learning about how psychedelics work, and if you're interested in starting to engage in the journey of utilizing psychedelic assisted therapy, please reach out to me, jesse@jesseharless.com, or reach out to me on Instagram, send me a message. I respond to all inquiries. So if you're interested in starting to pursue that work, and obviously there's many different psychedelic medicines, so please reach out. I'm happy to start that conversation for you to help curate that experience, whether you're preparing for the journey, you're about to go on the journey, or you're now integrating the journey. So with that said, today's guest is Jeremy Lipkowitz. And Jeremy is someone who was actually a Buddhist monk at one point. He did over 100 days of silent meditation. He's pursued all these mindfulness paths. But before that, he was actually on his way to get his PhD at Duke University. He was studying genetics. And in that process, he started to have a serious addiction to internet pornography, which led to a lot of shame. And so that led him on the path of finding mindfulness and all these practices. So I think you're really going to love this episode. We talk a lot about shame and addiction, the neuroscience of it. We also talk about all the kind of the stigma and myths of mindfulness and getting into this process that can be extremely helpful for people. So I hope you enjoy the show. I hope you have a great day. Have a blessed day, everyone. Hey, Jeremy, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, this is going to be a great conversation, I feel, because number one, this is my first podcast I've recorded at night. And so I'm sure the people watching are going to be happy for the lighting. Usually my lighting is dictated on the sun, and I get yelled at by my editor, and he's like, why do you do this? So let the sun come down, or it's rainy season here, so the clouds hit the sun, and then my lighting changed. But now we have stable lighting for the first time. So it's a really special moment for the lighting and for this episode. So with that said, welcome. And I'm glad that you were on a podcast with Alana Pratt. And then you found my podcast, and shout out to Alana. She's been a friend for a while. I was on her show as well. And just really cool how everything works and ties together. And I would like to maybe start with your story, which is how I usually start. And you have a really fascinating story. And wherever you'd like to start, but maybe you can start with, how did you go from studying genetics and becoming like a neuroscientist, right? And then heading towards problems with addiction. How did that happen with porn? And then maybe at a high level, how you started the path, and then we can pick it up somewhere in that conversation.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on the show. Excited to be here and kind of talk about some of the work that I do. To dive into my story, it's all intertwined. The addiction, my studies in genetics, they all go way back. But just for some context, my background is in genetics and genomics. I was working on first a bachelor's and then a PhD. Was working at Duke. And my goal in life was to become a research professor. I loved science. I loved doing research. I loved that whole world. But at the same time, starting at a very early age, when I was maybe 7, 8, 9 years old, I started getting into things that they weren't porn, but they were kind of pornographic. I was using them as porn. So it started off with the lingerie catalogs coming in the mail when I was a kid, comic book characters, magazines. And then eventually when I got the internet, we got dial-up, then I started getting into downloading porn, and it just slowly progressed throughout my life. Again, from that early age of 7, 8, 9 years old, where I started experimenting with these things, to the point where when I was in college, when I was at University of California at Davis, I was watching porn basically every night for about an hour or two every night. And at some point, I had this realization, and I can talk a little bit later about what that moment of realization was. But I had this realization that porn was really impacting my life in harmful ways. I started to see that it was impacting my ability to be satisfied in relationships, to have healthy expectations of intimacy. It was screwing with my perceptions of self-worth. I was constantly comparing myself to the people I saw in these porn scenes. And then also just the ways that it was impacting my overall happiness. It's kind of screwing with my dopamine systems and all that. So I had this realization that, hey, this is screwing with my life and I need to change. So I'll kind of fast forward, and eventually I found my way out of it primarily through a blend of neuroscience and Buddhist philosophy. That was really the turning point for me, was diving into some of those philosophies around Buddhist meditation and inner peace and happiness, but combining it with the understanding of neuroscience and neuroplasticity and positive psychology. So I ended up finding my way out. And then about 7 years ago, I started helping other people with it, realizing that there's a lot of guys out there that are still struggling with this, and I could really make a difference.
Yeah, it's really fascinating because, addiction doesn't discriminate. And having an addiction to internet pornography, which we'll get into in the episode, but it's definitely, I think you mentioned this on another show that I was listening to, it's probably not getting better. And just with where we're going with technology, AI and AI girlfriend, and people have heard of AI girlfriend from another episode I did, and just how the algorithms follow you, even when you're trying to not watch, especially when you're trying to not watch, I think. I don't know how that happens, but it's pretty, it's pretty amazing just how it's like, I'm sure some would call it evil, but I think it's just how powerful technology is and what it can sense and what it listens to and what you're trying to avoid. A lot of times, even if you view a video for only a few seconds, sometimes it can, even if you tell it, hey, I don't want to see this content, right? Hey, it's still will. It's like it waits for the right moment to share it. And this is not conspiracy. People know this. When you go to the search on Instagram, or the stuff that pops up is just, it's wild. So with that said, we can get into that. But before I do, I want to know more about what you've learned with the neuroscience of addiction. So what have you learned? Because even your podcast is called Unhooked, and there's a great book called Your Brain on Porn, and or is that a TED Talk? I can't remember. Your Brain on Porn. No, it's a book. Yeah, it's a great book, and there's a picture of a hook of a guy's brain on the cover, and I think about your podcast name, and like what is happening in the brain when it comes to pornography, especially internet pornography?
Yeah, it's a great question. We could probably spend multiple podcast episodes just diving into this. For me, understanding what's going on in the mind and in the brain and how these mechanisms and how, just our natural physiology, our natural biology is getting hijacked by these companies and corporations. And that's the other thing, just to speak very quickly on what you said earlier, it's like, we can call it evil, but I think it's also important for people to just understand there's just so much money behind trying to get you addicted to porn. I mean, people don't realize how big the porn industry is, but it's bigger than all the sports leagues in the US combined, bigger than the NBA, the MLB, the NFL. If you combine all the sports leagues, there's still more money in the porn industry. It's just a huge, huge industry. And so there's a lot of incentive, financial incentive to get you addicted to it. And people think it's just this passive, social media algorithm, but it's not. It's really, there's a lot of money trying to get you hooked. And the way that it gets you hooked is that it taps into, our brain's functioning, the way it works, the way it's evolved. If we look at how we evolved to seek out comfort and pleasure, primarily through sex and food and other things. But we have this natural tendency to want to latch on to things that feel good. And so the porn industry does a very good job of hijacking those systems. And that's one of the things that happens is we get hijacked by it. We get hooked by it. And, we can dive into some of the systems that are there, but dopamine is a big part of it. Dopamine is that, neurotransmitter chemical that makes us feel good. It makes us feel engaged, and it makes us crave, makes us want things. A lot of people think it's just the kind of neurotransmitter of feeling good, like it's the pleasure signal, but it's actually less about pleasure and it's more about wanting, which is really interesting. Like it does make us feel good and that's how we get addicted to it, but it's also much more the chemical involved in craving and wanting and desire, which is why in addiction, sometimes we get to the point where we want something or we crave something, even if it no longer makes us feel good. If somebody's addicted to video games, they might get to the point where they don't even want to play, or they want to play, they don't enjoy it anymore, but they have this feeling, I need to do it. It's this, I need it, I crave it, I want it, even if it doesn't feel good anymore. And so dopamine is a big part of what's going on in addiction.
Yeah, for sure. It makes me think of the other reasons too why people will continue to engage in behaviors that are punishing them. There might be a temporary reward, but sometimes it's not even a reward and they're still being punished. And I think that part of that could be, of course, the brain and dopamine, but I also think it's tied to shame and the cycle of the way that someone is perceiving how they get love. And so sort of like, I have personal experience with this. So this is, the world of addiction. Do I believe in like an addictive personality and all these things? Not really. I think there's underlying trauma and there's underlying, even for some it's PTSD, even what just happened and watching that live assassination. I think that it's PTSD for some nervous systems. And, what happens when we witness that? For some of us with a dysregulated nervous system or prior PTSD, they may look to find ways to cope that could be negative and hurtful. And so I think like it's a complex issue. Addiction is not black and white by any means. There's so much to it. And so, dopamine's one of them. That's kind of the buzzword. That's a big money maker too, is, dopamine diet, dopamine detox. It's like, okay, we get it. Yeah. But I think for some, it goes much deeper and looking at the nuances and looking at PTSD or shame or these cycles. And what do you think about that? What I'm saying is, with shame and
Yeah.
PTSD and these other ways that people get hooked?
Well, there's so many different topics we can go down. Shame is a big one, and I think we should explore that. But just to talk about the trauma and PTSD and what you mentioned, coping mechanisms. All addiction really is about unhealthy coping mechanisms. It's really about when people don't have ways of coping with what's happening, coping with negative emotions, painful emotions, then they reach out for some of these things to numb or to escape. And so, just as you mentioned with the recent kind of assassination that's all over the news in the US, for some people, when that happened, they know how to cope with it in healthy ways. They know that they can go talk to someone, they can talk to a friend or a family member, they can go for a walk in nature, go to the gym, they can accept and process their emotions in healthy ways. But for other people who haven't learned these healthy ways of dealing with strong emotions, they might need to escape that emotion. And it can escape into an unhealthy way. It might be porn, might be alcohol, might be drugs, video games. And that's one of the things I like to say. It's like, I talk a lot about porn on my podcast, but it's not really about porn. It's about anything that we might use as a way to numb out or escape. So porn is just one symptom that some people use to escape, but it can really be anything. It can be video games, it can be junk food, it can be Netflix, it can be achievement. We have a lot of high achiever syndromes where people think I just need to work harder and that will fix all my problems. And it's actually an escape from their problems. They're trying to run away from loneliness or boredom or sadness or trauma that happened in the past. So definitely, like, as you say, this word dopamine is kind of a buzzword, and a lot of people, dopamine this, dopamine that. But sometimes it's missing, the real thing here, which is understanding your nervous system, understanding trauma, understanding emotions, and how are we processing emotions. And that's a big part of recovery. And when I say a part of recovery, I don't mean just for people who are capital A addicts, people who are in some dark alleyway shooting up a drug. Recovery, for all of us, we all have these ways where we escape, where we numb out, where we self-sabotage. And so part of not doing that self-sabotaging behavior towards ourselves anymore is learning how to embrace your experiences, whether they're pleasant or unpleasant. If you're experiencing loneliness or sadness or a feeling of self-hatred is coming up, can you have the tools and the ability to work with that rather than numbing out, jumping on a dating app, ordering some junk food, all the ways that we escape these things. So it's for all of us. It's not just people who classify themselves as addicts.
Mm. Yeah, my brain goes in so many directions because of this. These are topics that I've been talking about for decades, and these are just the topic of addiction and the mental health, and I think for many listeners it hits really close to home. There's maybe family members that they have who are addicted, and maybe it was alcohol, maybe it was sex addiction, maybe it was just workaholism, like you said, and I think a lot of people too are addicted to social media, and they don't really know what to do anymore because it's just like you're like, oh, I'm in nature, and then it's like, boom, you're looking at your phone, and I don't think we're even understanding how much that's impacting our dopamine, our system, our brain, our limbic system, the way that we receive pleasure and the way that we cope. And I think it's becoming the norm. So let's just put porn aside. People hear porn and they're like, okay, this is not about me and blah, blah, blah. But it's like, well, it is about you, because when we think about how many times a day you look at the phone, and I'm talking ages 70, 60, 50. I'm not even talking about teenagers and 20 and 30-year-olds. I'm talking my mom, people that I watch. I'm seeing 60, 70-year-olds because they're lonely. They're trying to catch up. They're trying to keep up. Like, what's going on here? And
Yeah.
it's just, I feel like something changed like 5 to 7 years ago, where there's people now who struggled with technology, who are older, baby boomers, and I feel like they're catching up. And I don't know why. I don't know if that's because the AI, or if it's because it's just become easier, more accessible. But why do you think that? Why do you think there's just an explosion now of just phone time and phone consumption and internet? So what do you think that,
Yeah.
what's going on there?
Yeah. Well, you bring up a really good point. It doesn't discriminate. And this is not just, teenagers or horny young boys who are getting addicted to porn or anything. I mean, again, when it comes down to addictive kind of behaviors, we all have in some way that void inside of us, that emptiness that we're trying to fill. We feel agitated, we feel not comfortable in our own skin, we don't feel at peace inside. And because we're not secure and comfortable with who we are, we're searching for something to make us feel better, right? And so for a lot of these old people, as you say, it could be loneliness, it could be a sense of, wanting more validation. Who knows what it is, but there's some way that they're searching for something to make themselves feel better, right? And, what's going on right now in our society, social media, which is in some ways, it's a flavor of porn, right? It's getting on your phone, scrolling through and looking for little hits of dopamine, little hits of something to make you feel good. And there's something in the porn recovery world that we talk about. It's called the 3 A's of porn addiction. And it's these 3 things that make porn so highly addictive. And it actually applies to social media as well. So these 3 A's that make something highly addictive is the affordability, the accessibility, and the anonymity. So the more of these 3 that you have, the more addictive something is going to be. If something is highly affordable, let's say you have a drug that costs $5,000 every time you want to take one hit. It's very hard to get addicted to it, unless you're, of course, a billionaire, right? But the more expensive it is, the less likely you're going to get addicted, just because it's not that accessible, affordable. But if you have a drug that costs $1 every time you want to take a hit, it's much easier to get addicted to it. The closer you get to 0, the more addictive it's going to be. And right now, porn, social media, news sites, all these things, they're free. You can get it, for 0 cost. And so that's one of the contributing factors that makes it more addictive. The next thing that's related to that is accessibility. Again, if you have a drug, let's say it's free, but it's just very hard to get. Like, you have to go through some trek in order to get it. You have to call people up and wait an hour to get it. It's not accessible. You're not likely to become very addicted. But the more accessible it becomes, the easier it is to get addicted. So again, social media, porn, it's in all of our pockets at all times. All you have to do is pull your phone out and it's right there. Particularly with social media, where you can do it in public. There's no kind of social pressure to not look at social media in public. Whereas porn, you at least usually have to kind of get some privacy. But so the accessibility is really high. And then the anonymity. I mean, with porn, you can use this drug without anybody knowing. Social media, nobody really cares. And so in that sense, it's also anonymous. So, one of the reasons that it's becoming such an addiction for so many people is just it taps into our evolutionary drives of wanting validation, wanting excitement, wanting distraction. There's this great book called The Irresistible by Adam Alter, and he's a researcher, and he wrote about how these social media companies and video game companies, they design their products to be as addictive as possible. They hire gambling experts from casinos to figure out how to make their apps and their games as addictive as possible. And so again, there's billions of dollars behind these things trying to hook our attention. And so that's why it's just so common these days.
Yeah, and you think about the foods too, and how addicting the foods are, and how addicting they've been over decades, and only becoming
the exact
more
same
addictive.
thing. Yeah, I mean, they put billions of dollars into figuring out how to make a can of Pringles as addictive as possible, or whatever kind of junk food it is, highly palatable, doesn't make you feel full, makes you want more. It's very addictive.
So a lot of people know this, right? So people listening, they're like, yep, I know I'm addicted to Pringles, or, I watch porn once in a while. I'm scrolling my phone 8 hours a day. Okay. And what? Like, so I think one of the things I'd like to get into is, why do people change? I think this is addiction has become the norm. Dr. Gabor Mate's work with the myth of normal, and if anyone has got into that book, I mean, the myth of normal, what is he really saying? Like, what is normal anymore? And what is the average teenager now? And I think I can't remember the age group, but the average screen time was like 12 to 13 hours a day. And it was kids. I don't remember the exact age group, but it's like, just think about that, 12 to 13 hours a day on the phone, and that's normal. So I think, why is this discussion so important that we're having today?
Yeah.
Because I feel people are like bored of the conversation of recovery. They're just like, yep, this is what I'm doing. AI girlfriend's next. VR is next for me. Like, whatever. Like, so why does this matter? Why does this matter that we want to recover from this?
Yeah. I think, this conversation that you and I are having right now matters because you asked the question, why do people change? Because this is kind of normal and most people just feel it's normal. But one of the main reasons people change is they start to have some awareness. They get educated, where they have some insight into realizing the harms of their behavior. And this was the case for me. This is how I, broke free from my addiction to porn. And it's true for so many of the guys who I work with, is that so many people start by believing, hey, this is harmless, or it's not that big of a deal. I can be on social media all day. What's the problem with it? But once you start to see how it's harming your life, once you start to learn the facts of, hey, this is actually having real negative impacts on your life, that's kind of a critical, essential component that has to be there in order for change to happen. If you have something that's pleasurable and you don't think there's any negative consequences to it, of course, you're never going to have any impetus to change. So what allows people to change is the awareness of, hey, this is actually harming your life. With porn, that's a huge one because there are so many guys out there who don't realize the ways in which it's harming their life. There's so many guys out there who just think, what's the big deal? I watch porn once a night. What's the problem with that? I'm not harming anyone. It's just something I do. It's normal, quote unquote. Everybody does it. But they don't realize the ways it's impacting their relationship, the ways that it's impacting their expectations of intimacy, the ways that it's impacting their ability to focus or do deep work or take joy in simple pleasures in life. So, starting with that awareness of, turning on the light and shining a light on, hey, even though you can't see it because it's not obvious, these are the ways that it's impacting your life. So that's why this conversation is so important. And the same with social media, we could even say. People need to actually understand how it's harming their life, because it's very different from something like heroin or, meth or one of these hard drugs that you will notice the consequences right away, right? Oh, okay, I'm hungover from that alcohol bender and I can't perform at work, and I know it's because of alcohol. With things like social media and porn, a lot of people don't realize, the ways that I'm suffering in my life, at work, in my relationships, with my self-esteem. They don't realize a lot of it is coming from their digital diet, the things that they're feeding themselves and the ways that they're treating their brain every night when they log on to porn, or every night when they log on to, their social media, because these effects are so subtle and long-term and downstream. And that was one of the key things that happened to me. I talked about, I had this moment of realizing porn was impacting my life. I started to see not just what it was doing in the present, but also, hey, if I stay on this path, if I keep living in this way, I saw where it was leading me in my future. I realized I was going to be miserable, alone, kind of, this old 70-year-old dude who was hitting on girls at college bars because that's what porn was doing to my brain. And so I think it's really important for conversations like this for people to start to realize, hey, this is harming your life and you can live in a better way. And that's the second part of this whole thing, is understanding what's the promise, what's the alternative. And when you see that there's an alternative that's so much better, that's what motivates you to change.
Yeah, that's well said. I think about quitting alcohol at 22, and, it was in part forced sobriety because of I was arrested and it was part of the probation. But regardless, I could have started drinking again eventually, but I still haven't drank. It's been about 20 years in December. And one of the reasons I don't drink is because I don't see the value and benefit in it, especially now as I get more into psychedelics and learning about the efficacy, but also the safety of psilocybin and different psychedelics versus alcohol. And, so for alcohol, you could say for me, it's at this stage easy to stay away from because it's been so long. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to other things that are like internet pornography, and I've been single most of my life, so I've had a lot of opportunity to engage in internet pornography. And like you, I started at, I think you mentioned 8 years older, but I was around 10 years old when I got into high-speed internet pornography. And it definitely impacted my life in a major way, and especially in my adulthood. So like you said, not attributing maybe pornography, internet pornography, to the problems. That could be some people. Maybe it's, it's not that it's just denial, but they're not looking at that. They're looking at their money situation. They're looking at something else that happened. They're not looking at the internet porn as the problem. And for me, I had to take a hard look at that in 2014. And I had to take a hard look at that from 2014 onwards, when there was times when I was extremely tempted to self-soothe my pain with internet pornography. And I think that is a huge motivator, is you start to have, especially with mindfulness, you start to have these realizations of what you want to have and what you don't want to have. And when you start to do the process of elimination of, okay, what are these things that are making me angry, triggered, overeat? And you just go through the list, or loneliness, or not engaging with women, or sexualizing and objectifying women, and all these things, you can start to go, okay, I see. All right. And I think that's a huge motivation, is when you have that realization, self-realization, you have these deep inner conversations with yourself. So with that said, what role does mindfulness play when it comes to discovering what are the things that are blocking you and really holding you back from what you actually desire and want in this life?
Yeah, great question. Mindfulness, it's so important, and it's one of the reasons why in the group that I run, the kind of the men's group, it's one of the main things that we focus on, is making sure that you have a consistent mindfulness practice in whatever way. It doesn't have to look a certain way. It doesn't have to be sitting on the floor with your legs crossed, but just having some kind of self-awareness and mindfulness practice to start to cultivate that present moment awareness. And the reason it's so important, there's a number of reasons, but one of the main things is just to see more clearly what's happening and see what's hijacking your attention, what's going on behind the scenes that you might not realize. Because there's so much going on inside your mind that is driving your behavior without you realizing it. A lot of the times in the coaching work I do, I use this metaphor of like, who's driving the bus? And a lot of times it's not your higher self who's driving the bus. It's not, the source of wisdom and love and compassion and patience who's driving the bus. It's the, temperamental 13-year-old boy who, wants to eat cheeseburgers and go have sex with everything, who's driving the bus. And he's got the parents locked in the trunk, and he's just going on a wild ride. And so, that question of who's driving the bus right now, who's dictating my behavior? And that takes some self-awareness, takes mindfulness of what's happening moment to moment, the moment you feel this inclination to reach for your phone, a lot of people don't realize that there is that moment. They just think, oh, okay, I've got to reach for my phone now. And all of a sudden their phone is in their hand and they're scrolling on social media or swiping on a dating app or pulling up a porn site. But they didn't actually see all the events that led up to it. And so if you can have more of that granularity of what's going on moment to moment, you can see, oh, right now there's a feeling of loneliness and I don't like this feeling. This is painful. I want to escape this feeling of loneliness or boredom or sadness or despair or hopelessness. So let me do something to numb out. Let me do something that I know will give me a little hit of pleasure and escape this feeling. Oh, the phone, that's what's been doing it for me all these years. So, okay, let me grab my phone. But it's not a conscious thing. It's a subconscious thing. It's just on autopilot from years of repeating that behavior. So mindfulness is the thing that gives us the ability to see that and then to make a different choice. There's this fantastic quote. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's attributed to Viktor Frankl, but it's actually Stephen Covey summarizing the work of Viktor Frankl. But Viktor Frankl was this Holocaust survivor. He was in the concentration camps. He came out, he was a psychologist and wrote these amazing books. And some of his work was summarized by Stephen Covey, who wrote this. He said, between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space is your power to choose your response. And in your response lies your growth and your freedom. So this understanding that between any stimulus and your response, there's a space there. But if you don't have any space, it just becomes a reaction. There's a stimulus, reaction. Something unpleasant, reaction. I got to run away. Something pleasant, reaction. I got to grasp after it, right? But if you have the ability to access that space, you can choose how to respond. And in your response lies all your growth and your freedom in life. All of your growth, all your freedom as a human being is in that space where you get to choose how you want to show up in the next moment. Because otherwise you're just a robot. You're just following out your habit patterns that have been there since you were young. So mindfulness is the thing that gives us the ability to choose how to respond. And then, we can talk about, okay, well, how do you choose how to respond in a healthier way? Because this is the other problem. A lot of people who struggle with addiction, they know what they're struggling with. They know, hey, porn is causing harm in my life and I still can't stop, right? Like every person who's listening to this podcast right now knows that in some way. I know I shouldn't eat that second slice of chocolate cake, but I just feel helpless. I can't stop myself. And so the question is, when you're in that stage of addiction where you know it's a problem and you know you would be better served to not do it, how do you then actually make the healthy choice, the skillful choice? And that's the work of recovery. That's where it's not just use willpower and, brute force it. That's where you need to start using some of the tools of recovery. Mindfulness is one. Self-compassion is another. Accountability and community and support, being vulnerable, being seen. There's so many things that can help us.
Yeah, I don't know why this is coming up, but in one of the steps, the 12 steps, which I know is not your path, and it's a path that I took forcefully, because again, when I was arrested, that was the prescription they gave me. And so I did it. And I'm grateful that I went that path to learn all about it for over 15 years. And one of the steps is sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God. And it's really interesting. Well, first of all, the word God is very triggering to some. But let's just
to me. It's so funny. It's one of the reasons I couldn't get into it. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
but yeah, go on.
But just, and of course, this is 1939 too. So this is not recent. These steps are written way in the past. But at the same time, when we think of mindfulness, I think a lot of people think of meditation. So it was interesting that even back in the 30s, in the steps, it was mentioned meditation in that step. So what is mindfulness, and is it meditation, and how do you start? Because people don't want to. I know plenty of people who are like, I'm not going to meditate, I'm a Christian. So there's a lot of nuances here. So let's talk about that. What is mindfulness, and how does someone start with this, and how do we address this idea of meditation being bad?
Yeah, great question. And I guess just for some context, that I didn't really talk about in the introduction. After I discovered my porn addiction, went down these rabbit holes, I really got into meditation in a big way and started, attending these meditation retreats in India and Thailand, and spent time as a Buddhist monk in Myanmar. And meditation was basically the biggest part of my life for the greater part of 10 to 15 years. I ended up becoming a meditation teacher. And it was only after teaching meditation for about 10 years that I started doing this work in porn addiction recovery. So my background is really in genetics, and then it was in meditation. What meditation is, what mindfulness is, the way I like to describe it, meditation is the umbrella term for any kind of cultivation of the mind. Any practice that you do where you're cultivating particular mental traits or qualities can be thought of as meditation. And so there are many different kinds of meditation. There are many different flavors of meditation. Mindfulness meditation is one type of meditation, but there are also other types of meditation that cultivate different qualities, different traits. So for example, loving kindness meditation is a different type of meditation. It's not mindfulness meditation. It's very beneficial. It cultivates a different thing. It cultivates what we call loving kindness. There's also, many people have heard of transcendental meditation, where it's more mantra focused and you're repeating a phrase over and over. And that's, again, another type of meditation. It's not mindfulness. So you're not cultivating the quality of mindfulness. What you're cultivating in transcendental meditation is the quality of concentration, or single pointed attention, focus. Mindfulness meditation. So mindfulness is, again, this quality of the mind that's very important. And in mindfulness meditation, you're doing a training to cultivate mindfulness. So then the question is, what is mindfulness? Mindfulness is simply the present moment awareness of what's arising. What's arising in the present moment in your experience, but with a very particular quality of the attention. So it's not just this cold clinical awareness. It's the quality of the awareness is that it's kind of open or spacious or accepting of what's arising. So some people call it a non-judgmental awareness. You can call it a non-reactive awareness, but essentially it's an awareness of whatever's happening in your experience in the present moment, without pushing it away or judging it to be bad or good, or, I need to get rid of this. It's just this, this is arising right now. And in terms of what we pay attention to, it can be anything that's, again, in your experience, any of, sights or sounds or smells or physical sensations, or things arising in your mind as well, thoughts, feelings, memories. So again, just the awareness of what's arising in the moment without judging it as good or bad, just this acceptance of, this is arising right now. And so, for example, with mindful breathing, a lot of people have heard of, mindful breathing. With mindful breathing, you're simply bringing your attention to the feeling of the breath in your body, the physical sensation in the moment as it's happening, without thinking, this is a good breath or a bad breath. This is how it is right now. Right now the breath is shallow, or right now the breath is deep. The next moment, there might be a sound in your experience. Now there's hearing arising. So that's what mindfulness is. It's simply this present moment awareness of what's happening, including in your body, but also in your mind. And that's really, a key component there. Awareness of what's happening in your mind is something most people never get to explore. Like, to realize that loneliness is arising, and to be aware that loneliness is arising, is such a different experience to simply being lost in loneliness. I'm not sure if I said that right, but awareness, if loneliness is arising, if you're not aware of it, you're just lost in the loneliness. You just think, I'm so lonely. Nobody loves me. I'm never going to, whatever, right? It's a state of suffering.
It becomes the norm. It becomes
the norm. And it becomes your reality. You accept it as truth. But if you're aware that it's an emotion that's arising temporarily and passing through you. It's, there's an experience of loneliness arising. And you don't have to identify or over-identify with it. You don't have to believe that it's true in this grand kind of way, like, oh, I am such a miserable person and nobody's going to love me. It's just, sadness is arising. Loneliness is arising. So that's kind of what mindfulness is. And again, it's critically important for recovery because it gives us the ability to work with the things that drive our behavior in unskillful ways.
Yeah, and it's really a masterful skill to develop because it's something that, as long as I've been in recovery, whatever that means, because that word also is triggering to people. But let's say my podcast is called Entrepreneurs in Recovery. So hopefully if you're listening, you've understood what I meant by the word recovery, which is recovery from, like I said, workaholism, or maybe it's recovery from, just beating yourself up all the time and getting out of that. But I think part of getting out of that thinking process, which can be toxic, is, like you said, being aware that it's even happening. And I think there's been a few things that have helped me to become aware of my thinking and how it continually is habitual and in many ways is like the wounded inner child continually trying to get the love it didn't get, and is now today finding it through ways to self-soothe and numb out. And so becoming aware that even exists, first of all, it's with a conversation like this, someone listening and hearing that and resonating, and then wondering, what can I do about that? And for me, it took a long time to figure this out, to identify my emotions and to understand what is loneliness, what is aloneness, and part of that is because I had a dysregulated nervous system for such a long time. And for some, it could be ADHD. It could be many different things that they're struggling with. And I think, so I guess where I'm going with this is, if someone is listening and they're like, I can't do meditation, I can't do mindfulness. I hear this all the time. I can't do it. When I go to do it, I'm disrupted. I got the to-dos are coming up in my head. How do you help men and women with this? Like, how do you get people to, you've obviously done Vipassana, you've done silent meditation retreats. I've done them too. I've done trainings and different things. And I still struggle sometimes with just having that mindfulness practice. So what about someone who doesn't have this all-in entrepreneur crazy, who just I just can't do it? What is your advice to them? How do they get there?
Great question. I'm so glad you asked this because there's so many misconceptions around what it means to be mindful or what it means to be good at meditation. Like, you don't have to, one of the biggest misconceptions in meditation is, I need to sit down and clear out my thoughts. I need to block out my thoughts and just have quiet in the mind and just feel at peace. And I'll sit down and cross my fingers in a certain way and look like a, Zen meditator type of thing. That's not what being mindful is. Again, mindfulness is aware of what's arising as it's arising. So you could have a crazy agitated mind. You could have a crazy stressful mind in the moment, thoughts going all over the place. And if you're simply aware, my mind is crazy right now, that's still mindfulness. If you sit down for a 10-minute meditation and your mind is just can't sit still for even half a second to follow more than a single breath, that's fine. Just bring awareness to, my mind feels really crazy right now. Or, I feel restless. I don't want to sit here. That's mindfulness too. And so part of it is just debunking some of these misconceptions around what a good mindfulness practice is. It's not sitting down and looking like a yoga teacher. It's even just one moment. Let's say you sit down to do a 10-minute mindfulness practice every day. If you just have one moment of noticing something that's going on in your experience, whether in your mind or your body, that's a good practice. That's all you need is one moment of noticing. It can literally be the first moment you sit down where you say, okay, let me follow my breath, and you follow it for half a second. And then for the rest 9 minutes and 59 seconds, your mind is lost in thought. That's still a good practice because you cultivated a little bit of that awareness, and over time it gets stronger. And your mind might continue to be, distracted and agitated and jumpy and all over the place. But what's going to grow is your ability to see it and to notice it in a non-reactive way. And so that's the first thing that can help. The second thing that I'll say to anybody out there who's listening who says, I've tried meditating and I'm just no good at it. It's just not for me. It's like somebody saying, I've tried doing yoga, but I'm just not flexible. So yoga's not for me. The whole point of doing it, the whole point of you doing yoga is not just to be more flexible. That'll get the yoga teachers out there mad at me. The whole point of yoga is all kinds of things. But for us normal humans, going to yoga class is about becoming more flexible. And if we're not flexible, that's the whole reason we need to go to a yoga class, is to improve our flexibility. It's also like saying, hey, I'm no good at speaking Spanish, so I can't go to a Spanish class because I can't speak Spanish. That's the whole point of going to a Spanish class, right? The whole point of practicing meditation is to get better at meditation. If you're lacking in awareness and your mind is all over the place, that's the whole point. That's why we sit down to cultivate, to train. And this gets to a topic that is really near and dear to my heart, which is understanding neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is something that was so pivotal for me in my recovery, and just understanding how to break free is understanding that what you frequently think about or do, where you pay attention and what you're doing with your mind strengthens those neural connections. So this quote that I remember reading early on in my recovery is, neurons that fire together wire together. The more frequently you do certain things, the stronger those neural pathways become. If you want to strengthen your ability to be aware, to have awareness and to be mindful and present, you simply have to strengthen those neural pathways. It's like going to the gym for the mind. And that's what having a regular meditation practice is.
Yeah, I think that's really important because that gives factual evidence of proof and hope that you can change, because every person, every human has the ability to create a new baseline with neuroplasticity. And I'm sure there's exceptions to this, but for most people listening, you probably can promote neuroplasticity in your brain, and create those new neural connections. So like what I'm hearing you say is, you don't have to do a 10-day silent meditation retreat. You don't have to do all these things. You can just start to become aware of what's going on inside, what's going on with Jesse, what's coming up when I just sit with myself, and being mindful of that. And as I do that continually over time, I'm starting to, like you said, neurons will start to fire in ways that they haven't before, taking new pathways. And then all of a sudden I'm creating real change in my brain, which is creating real change in my body. And I'm able to then really start to see that change because I'm noticing, oh, wow, I went to, after doing this for 7 minutes for 7 days, I went to go grab those chips and I stopped myself. I had this thought that like, that's not part of my goals. My goals is not to have those. That's on the cheat moment or cheat day, or whatever, if they're even doing that. Or it's, I would notice when I went to go, I was really angry at that person and then I got cut off. And then when I got home, I wanted to watch porn. And I noticed myself really drawn towards that. And I think that's what you're saying. And that's something that's real. It's something that I've seen for so many years and so many years of myself, this power of neuroplasticity. And it can come from a mindfulness practice for sure. I have personal experience with that. There's people in my life who are, who have developed a practice like this, and it's been completely life-changing. And they've also quit porn. I have men in my life who, and I say men because there are women, but the women in my life I don't know of that are close to me that have porn addiction, but they know people who do. And but there's many men in my life that have struggled with porn addiction, and because my path was dedicated to this life of change and seeing how I can be my best self and develop a relationship, like you said, with my higher self. And I, I've seen mindfulness practices, which is simply to be aware of slowing down, change people's responses. And ultimately, some people it took a long time, but for others, it doesn't have to take that long. How long does it take, do you think, to start to see neuroplasticity start to develop and people start to have more control over their responses to these stimuluses that are addicting?
Yeah, I wish I could give you like, oh, it's 37 days, but it really just depends. It depends on
Some people
how.
do that. They say 8 days,
I know.
28 days. I guarantee it. Sign up in my funnel, and I'll sell you this
Yeah,
thing.
it bugs, particularly the scientist side of me. It bugs the crap out of me when people make these bold claims that are just, you're like, where are you coming up with this nonsense? The thing is, there's so many factors that affect it. How diligently you're practicing, what your motivation is. There's so many things that impact it. It's not. They used to say like, oh, it takes 48 days or 62 days to form a habit. Anyone who has tried to form a habit knows that it's not as simple as that. It can be for some people. You can form a habit, within 2 weeks, and it just stays for the rest of your life. And for other people, you might be doing something and rocking it for 90 days or 120 days, and then it falls off, right? And so there's so many factors that contribute to this. But what I will say, I think the important part here, and you touched on this earlier, you don't have to go attend a 10-day silent retreat. You don't have to become a Buddhist monk. It's just about starting to regularly practice more awareness in your day-to-day life. And I have seen so many radical transformations in people where even just practicing a little bit of mindfulness every day, even if it's just 2 minutes or 5 minutes a day, they start to see, as you say, these pattern interrupts where for their whole life, they've gone and reached for that bag of chips, or they've, reached for the porn. And after starting to integrate some mindfulness, they have this pattern interrupt where they're about to reach for it and they say, wait a minute, this is not aligned with my goals. This is not aligned with my higher values. Do I really want to do this? And that's another, important component of the work here is identifying what your values are, because they've shown that when you are motivated by living in alignment with your values, you're much more likely to accomplish your goals. It's a kind of intrinsic motivation that's a value-led intrinsic motivation that's much more efficacious in terms of accomplishing what you want to accomplish. But, the key thing here, you also asked earlier, like, if somebody's listening, they're like, well, I'm a Christian, I can't practice meditation. There's nothing religious about it. It's just being aware of what's happening in your experience. So it doesn't matter if you're Christian or, Muslim or Jewish or atheist, you can practice mindfulness meditation. You can train your mind to be aware and to make healthier choices. And it really does make a difference, if you actually implement it in your life.
Yeah, and you have, when you let our audience know, I know you have a course about mindfulness, and I think it's like Mindfulness Made Easy, so that's good. And is that what it's called? Yeah.
Yeah, and just for background, like, again, my context was for most of my life, I was a capital A atheist. I was one of these guys that would like go to the, atheist meetups on campus and debate, evolution versus creationism. And I was just very allergic to anything religious. I grew up in a religious household, and the dogma and the faith and the don't question stuff like really bothered me. And so I was very allergic to anything that felt remotely religious or spiritual. I thought meditation was woo-woo nonsense, And so for the longest time, I didn't get into it because I thought, oh, this meditation stuff, it's just hippy-dippy stuff, and it's not for, rational, skeptical type thinkers. But again, I started to realize, hey, mindfulness is really just a way of understanding how your mind is working, seeing more clearly the dynamics of your mind, and then starting to train and cultivate your mind in healthier ways. Like if you want to be more grateful in your life, if you want to have more gratitude, you simply have to train the neural pathways of being appreciative and grateful for what you have. It's just training the mind. It's very simple and secular. There's nothing kind of like mystical about it. There can be mystical sides to it, you know. If you're inclined in that direction, you can get into the mystical, but you don't have to. And even without it, it's a magical practice that has profound impacts on your life. So yeah, I have a course called Mindfulness Made Easy. You know, I think I've provided it to you. If anybody wants it, it's a free gift that would like to provide to your listeners. You know, happy to. So that course, it's a 14-day training guide. Every day there's a new introduction to some concept of mindfulness in terms of how to practice, what to focus on. And then there's a guided meditation that accompanies it, so people can check that out if they want.
Yeah, thanks for that. I'll definitely put that in the show notes. Yeah, this has been a fascinating conversation. I feel this could be a 2-hour conversation, easy, 2 to 5 hours. And I think that, I think what we'll do is, we'll bring you back on again in the future, because I feel the work that you're doing is really important for many reasons, not only because it's a similar space as me, but it's not even just that. It's just seeing how the world is right now and where it's going. I just think this is more important than ever. And technology is moving way faster than people can keep up. And so to have these conversations again and again are going to be important. And so, you know, Jeremy, thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. And we'll definitely have you back. We'll deep dive again and go into some of these areas. And I just think it's something to continue to come back to constantly. So how can people reach you? Where's the best place to reach you?
Yeah, I would say if people are interested in the work that I do, just checking out my own podcast called Unhooked, Breaking Point Addiction Podcast. If you just search Unhooked in any podcast platform, that's the best way to kind of learn about the work I do. If you want to learn more about the programs I run, just go to unhookedacademy.com or jeremylipkowitz.com.
Awesome. Well, Jeremy, it was really great to meet you and really great to have this discussion. And I'm really excited to put this out there and just remind people, you know, to take it easy, be easy on yourself, have some self-compassion, and just really appreciate your whole message, your attitude, your state of being. You know, you can tell that there's an ease that you brought me in this episode. And I'm sure it's a really great work that you're doing in these men's lives. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
I really appreciate it. You know, it's been a joy to meet you as well and to come on the podcast. And like you said, there's so many different topics we could go down the rabbit holes of, you know, especially with what's going on in society today and AI and all the things we need to look out for. So happy to come on again.
Yeah, well, in 6 months, it's going to be a different world and with AI and technology. So maybe we'll do that in 6 months. We'll bring you back and we'll check in with all these things we mentioned on the show and where things are, and you know, bring in some more mindfulness, bring in some more just checking in. I think sometimes just checking in with this stuff, you know, is good for people to hear and to know that there is a way out. There is a way to have some self-love, compassion, and really go towards your desires that you want. And it is possible, but it is, you know, starting to learn about these practices and finding ways to stop self-sabotaging. And so, yeah. Awesome, brother. Hey, thanks again. We can go on forever, but appreciate you coming on the show, my friend.
Happy to. See you next time.
Thank you for checking out Entrepreneurs of Recovery podcast. We are so appreciative that you are here. Make sure you go ahead and like and subscribe to the show on YouTube. Leave a review on iTunes and Spotify so more people can find the show. Once again, thank you so much. We have great episodes and content come out in the future. Thank you for being here. Have a blessed day.